Just getting low in the overgrown road that we follow.
My name is Jenny Hunter. I was class of 1979 here, although I left after 1978, and I am from Long Island, New York. Well, it's an interesting story, actually. My parents felt that it would be a good idea for me to go away from home because we were having a lot of family issues, and I loved the Southwest, and out of some sort of combination of love of the Southwest and perversity, I said that I wanted to go to a boarding school here rather than an Eastern boarding school. So we came out on a family vacation, and we looked at this school, we looked at Colorado Rocky Mountain, we looked at a couple of other schools, and I really loved it. And I was very interested in anthropology when I was at that age, and my family had done a lot of travel, and my brother loved it so much that he decided to come as well. Even though he was going into his senior year of high school, he came for 1 year. So I was actually supposed to be going into my freshman year of high school, but at that time Verde Valley didn't have that big of a freshman class. There would have been like 8 or 9 people, and so I went into sophomore year instead, and my brother went into senior year. I think that the impact was really when I arrived here. You know, my brother and I took a flight, to Phoenix, and we got picked up, and we arrived here in this environment. It felt quite alien at first. It was dark at night. I fell off one of the bridges my first night here, and Darren Warren was here at that time, and she was acting as the nurse, and she was, pleasantly chiding of me, and she fixed me up and cut on my leg. It felt very, very different and very free compared to what I had been used to. I think it has. I think it was a very good experience for me to be away from my family at that age. I was here from 13 to 15, and I think that was a very good experience for me. I think that even though I had traveled a lot, I hadn't actually had a lot of exposure to a lot of people who weren't kids that weren't from New York, and it widened my view of people of the United States, really. A funny experience that I had was we had a program then, which maybe you still have, where we would go and have dinner with a family in Sedona. It was just like, a thing. And usually often it was a one-off. But I think sometimes people would develop a relationship and go and have dinner and with the families again and get to know them. But I went, for example, the family that I went to, when they asked me questions about where I was from and who I was, they quickly told me that I was the first Jewish person they had ever met in their lives. And that's just an experience that I had never had, meeting people who lived like that, and were so. Sedona was, of course, a much smaller town then. It was much more. It wasn't what it is now. So I think that and also the experiences that I had, the field trip experiences, were extremely rich. They weren't easy. I had a hard time with both of my field trip experiences, but they were really very growth-inducing. I think I grew a lot from them in terms of understanding. One was Mexico and the other one was Navajo Indian Reservation, sort of bridging gaps and being thrown back on myself a lot and having to find the inner resources to deal with situations that were hard for me. But also bridging gaps in terms of understanding the way people think about things so differently. And that stayed with me. Probably Terry Town, who had the biggest influence on me when I was here. He was the anthropology teacher. I took a project period class with him of reading science fiction, for lying around and reading science fiction for however many days it was, which was fantastic. He was a very, very positive influence in terms of encouraging my mind. Maybe not one that you want on the tape. I mean, it was funny. I was here in, the mid-70s, and we would start the year with 110 students and end the year with about 80 because so many people would get kicked out. There was a lot of drugs, there was a lot of breaking rules, there was a lot of, I wasn't really part of that, but it was, we had an honor roll that was about 8 people. There were about 8 people who actually took academics seriously when we were here, and we were a very good friend. We were very supportive. Maybe it was 10, 12, I don't know. A very supportive friend group, and really, we really all grew together. But it was also, I felt like I got a little touch of the hippie atmosphere, even though I was younger than that generation. But that's not really an anecdote. But yeah, it was an interesting time to be here. I mean, I think VVS has gone through a number of challenging times, and that was one of them. That was clearly one of them. But that didn't mean it wasn't, a very rich and growth-inducing experience for those of us who were there. The first one I did, which was when I was in 10th grade, I guess I was 14, I went to a small Sonoran town in Mexico and stayed with a family who had a girl around my age, and there was one other VVS student in our town. And that one was fascinating to me. I mean, the girl who was around my age went to about 2 or 3 hours of school a day, seemed to be mostly interested in looking pretty and hanging out around the house, and boys, which I had absolutely no interest in at the time. And I remember it just was the town was a very slow-paced, quiet town. It was very small, and for example, there was only one TV in the town, as I recall it. One of the wealthier families in the town had a big TV, and they sort of set it up so that you could see it from outside the window of their house, and people would stand outside and watch it. Yeah, it was very, very interesting. I mean, my Spanish was a little weak for the challenge of the experience. Nobody spoke English. And the other student who was in the town with me, his name was Barack. His Spanish wasn't very good either, and the two of us were, we were having a lot of kind of semi-alienated conversations at the same time that we were also partaking in this society. And it was really, really interesting. And, in this pre-digital age, too, I mean, we were dropped off in this town. Well, at least we had each other. And then X number of days later, someone was going to come pick us up. But there was no contact with our families. There was no contact with VVS. There was no contact. I don't even think that the house I was staying in had a telephone. I mean, it must have. I don't know. I mean, this was the 1970s, but it was a fascinating experience. Really, really. And a lot of it that I took away was also just the slow pace and the way that, especially I grew up in New York, and I've been living in New York City now for most of my life, but just the way that people can live where their world is circumspect and quiet, and they have their role, and there was something lovely about that I really have never really been able to recapture. I mean, I in my adult life I've very much valued neighborhoods and communities, but this was like the ultimate of that. It was just fascinating to me, the way, especially the girl my age, I mean, she had a little bit of interest in mass culture, the Beatles, Beatles, but really, really was not looking beyond her horizon, and that was fascinating to me, and very different experience. So there were the other field trip that I did, which was, I was in a Catholic school in the Navajo reservation. It was a Catholic girls' school for teenagers, a boarding school. And that one was very, very interesting for me too. And I have often referred to it over the years because I got just a real immersion in two cultures. One was the nuns, who were still the traditional nuns with habit and everything. It was the 1970s. And were a little bit like, like overgrown teenagers, sort of giggly and silly, and that part was fascinating. And then there were the Navajo girls who were just a little bit younger than I was, or some of them I think were even my age. And watching their situation of growing up there on the reservation. I mean, while we were there, a child froze to death. And it was the spring, but it was because they were drinking. It was like a 10-year-old froze to death and died because the alcoholism was so prevalent that this 10-year-old was drinking and lying outside somewhere, and I guess it was a cold night or something. I mean, there was that reality was right there. And then on the other hand, these girls in their dorm rooms, or they had like a dormitory, had like pictures of Sean Cassidy and other like mass culture idols up, and and it just felt like it was hard to imagine how they would find their way. Another experience that I had that was interesting is I was on the basketball team, and there were 6 of us, by the way, 6 girls on the basketball team. And I was the worst, the tallest and the worst. I was terrible, but I had not learned how to jump yet. But we would travel and play at other independent schools, and some of the schools we played were Indian schools. I think they were boarding schools. One time we went to Yuma. We would go different places. And that also was just so interesting to have exposure to this. It felt like they were sort of ghettoized in a certain way, and it was hard to imagine where their life would lead them. It was kind of hard to imagine it leading to them going to, U of A, and like joining the mass world. It made me think a lot. It made me think a lot about, I felt both that they loved their culture and wanted to retain it, and also in some way couldn't imagine leaving and bridging the gap to the majority world. Although I know some people certainly did. I just felt like the girls that I knew, I couldn't see it quite. I just couldn't quite see that they were being given the sort of tools to thrive outside of their community. So that was amazing. If I could go back in time and have the experience here at Verde Valley again, or give my younger self some advice, I wish I had opened myself up to more members of the community. I was a little bit, I kind of stuck with the people that I stuck with, even though it was a very diverse community for me in terms of kids. It was a very different mix than kids that I had gone to school with, and not so much ethnically, as much as just like geographically and experience. And I felt like there were a lot of people that I didn't really get to know as well as I could have, and there were a lot of people I went to school with. I mean, partly because the culture was a little druggy and I wasn't. I think that's part of what was a barrier between me and a lot of people, but still I could have opened myself up to them in other ways and really gotten to know them. People were running up cow pie at night, and and doing things like that I never, or just sitting up there and talking, and I just wish that I had a little bit more self-confidence to find my way into that. Because I was a little bit, I don't know what the right word would be, prudish, conservative, careful. I wish I hadn't been so careful. That's not the advice you want kids to get, but
Visions